The Jewish name has historically varied, encompassing throughout the centuries several different traditions. This article looks at the onomastics practices of the Jewish people, that is, the history of the origin and forms of proper names. First name. Early Biblical era. The name conferred upon a person in early biblical times was generally connected with some circumstance of that person's birth. Several of Jacob's sons are recorded as having received the names in this manner. Generally, it was the mother who chose the name, as in the case of Jacob's sons, but there were occasions on which the father chose the child's name, such as in Genesis chapter 16 verse 15, 17, 19, and 21-2. Occasionally, persons other than the parents were the name givers, as in the cases of Moses and Solomon. It appears to have been the custom in early biblical times to confer a name immediately upon birth, but in later periods a name was given to a boy at circumcision. Before the Babylonian exile, it was not common practice to name children after the relatives. Even in the royal family, none of the 21 kings of Judah was named after a predecessor, or after David, the founder of the dynasty. On the other hand, of son of Jonathan and of King Saul were each named Merib-Baal. Instead of repeating the exact name of an ancestor, however, it was customary to make use of one of the elements of the family name. Thus, Ahitub has two sons, Ahir and Ahimelech. Three of Saul's family members have the element Baal in the names. As a consequence of this, avoidance of repetition of single name was as a rule sufficient to identify a person. It became traditional to identify a son by his father's name and a chosen name, like Jazaniah ben Shaphan, only in later years of Hebrew history. Significance. It is probable that, as in other ancient societies, a name carried spiritual significance. A large majority of the 2,800 personal names found in the Hebrew Bible convey a specific meaning. The meanings of the remainder have been obscured either through textual corruption or insufficient current understanding of comparative philology. In addition, a considerable number of these names are probably eponyms. There is little doubt that this applies to the names of the Israelite clans, each of which was assumed to be descended from the descendants of Jacob, described in Numbers chapter 26. Names may be derived from the order of birth, as in the cases of Jacob and Jacob, whose names probably mean posthumous. Jephthah implies firstborn, as does Beecher, while names like Manasseh, Nahum, and Nehemiah refer probably to children who have come to take the place of others that have died in childhood. The idea of relationship as expressed in Ahab, probably originally Ahiab. Personal peculiarities may give rise to a name, as Laban, Gideon, or Haram. Personality may be referred to, as in the names Job and Barak. There are no occupational names in the Bible corresponding to Anglo-Saxon names like Smith of England or Muller of Germany, but names taken from objects are found, especially among females. The name Rebecca seems to be derived from a sheep rope, Peninnah from pearl, and Karen Happer from a box of face paint. Abstract names seem to have been given primarily to women, such as Manoah and Mitchell. Jacobs gives 84 names derived from animals and plants. Leah is generally known as a word for cow, and Rachel for ewe. Oreb and Zedev were princes of the Midianites, and Caleb was the founder of the chief Judean tribe. Achbor and Shaphan also occur. Jonah is the equivalent of dove, Zipporah of bird, and Deborah of bee. Esther's Jewish name, Hadassah, means myrtle. Citing these animal-inspired names, Robertson Smith and others have attempted to find evidence of totemism among the ancient Hebrews. Other Jewish names taken from animals include Ori, Ariel means dove, and Tzvi. compound names. A distinctive characteristic of Bible onomastics is the frequency of composite names which form at times even complete sentences, as in the case of Isaiah's son Shear-Jashub and Hephzibah. Sometimes these composites have a preposition as the first element, as Bishlam and Lemuel, but in the majority of cases these composite names are theophorous, referring to, or actually mentioning, the deity, either by the name of YHWH or by the name of El. The specific name of the Hebrew God appears at the beginning as Jo and at the end as IH. Thus, Jonathan is a doublet of Elnathan, and Joazar is the same as Joazar. A whole theology may be deduced from the large number of biblical names referring to acts, actions, and attributes of the deity. Thus, YHWH gives, increases the family, is gracious, has mercy, blesses, loves, helps, benefits, holds fast, is strong, delivers, comforts, heals, conceals, establishes, knows, remembers, sees, hears, answers, speaks, is praised, is asked, comes, lives, exalts, uplifts, thunders, gladdens, judges, is just, is king, is Lord, is great, is perfect, is high, is glorious, is incomparable. Besides these distinct names of God, other divine names are used, as Adoni in Adoniram, Amelich in Nathan Melich and Ebed Melich, and Baal in Eshbaal. In some cases names of relationship seem to be used as applied to the deity, and in this way Abinadab would correspond to Jehonadab and Abiezer to Eleazar. The same applies to the elements RNAMM, as, however, some of these words are applied to families, not individuals. The whole must be taken as a sentence. Avihud means, my father is glorious. On the same principle it must be assumed that some verbal names are theophorous, and refer to the action of the deity, Nathan being the abbreviation of Elnathan, Shaphat of Jehoshaphat. Thus Ahaz appears in a form corresponding to Jehoaz in an inscription of Tiglath-Pileser III. Many of the theophorous endings are contracted into I or one, as in Shebna, Hosea, Talti, and Shemai. A few names are adjectival, and may contain references to the deity, Baruch, David, Amos. Some names have grammatical endings which it is difficult to interpret, as Oth in Shelamoth. The final I in Omri and Barzillai probably refers to a tribal origin. Many names ending in on are animal names, as Ephron, Nashon. Compare Samson. Post-exilic names. After the exile to Babylon there appeared a tendency toward the use of foreign names, the literal significance of which was disregarded, and this tendency became more and more prominent as time went on. Biblical names ending in "-a" are Aramaic, Shamsharai, while Mordecai is probably derived from Marduk, or may be derived from pure Mur, as are Belteshazzar, Shenazar, and Sheshbazzar from other deities. There is in this period a tendency also toward descriptive and adjectival names with the definite article prefixed, which easily gave rise to such surnames as Hakaz, Hakatan, and Haloja. In the Hellenistic period, Greek names became quite usual among the Jews, especially those of Alexander, Jason, and Antigonus. Even the name of a god like Apollo occurs. Other names are Apollonius, Hyrcanus, Lysimachus, Demetrius, Dosa, Nicanor, Pappus, Patroclus, Philo, Sosa, Symmachus, Tryphon, Zeno. The same occurs among women, as Alexandra and Priscilla. Roman names also occur, as Antonius, Apella, Drusus, Justinus, Justus, Marcus, Rufus, Tiberius, and Titus. It was during this period that the practice arose of giving a son the name of his grandfather, as was done in the high priestly family, the members of which were named alternately Onias and Simon from 332 to 165 BCE. Similarly, a little later, in the family of the Hillelites, the names Gamaliel and Judah succeed each other with only an occasional occurrence of Simon and Hillel. Toward the end of the period, owing to the intermixture of foreign languages, the use of double names for the same person began to be adopted, as in the instances of Simon Peter, John Mark, Thomas Didymus, Herodes Agrippa, and Salome Alexandra. Talmudic period. Among the names in the Talmud there is a considerable proportion of Greek ones. A large number also are Aramaic, ending in "-y" or "y". Abba, Huna, and Papa are instances of the former. Even Bible names were transformed in this direction: Anina instead of Hananiah, Abuya instead of Abia, while others were shortened, as Lazar. Many biblical names received renewed popularity owing to the distinction of the bearers, as those of Gamaliel, Hillel, and Allah. The tendency toward double names existed here, as Sarah Miriam, Yohanan Joseph, and Mahalil Judah. Converts to Judaism, like Aquila, Monobaz, and Helena, retained the pagan names. There was some objection to foreign names among the Jews of this period, yet legend declares that the high priest Simon promised Alexander the Great that all the children of priestly families born in the year following his visit to Jerusalem would be named Alexander, after him. In the adoption of double names during this early period, an attempt was made to translate the Hebrew terms into corresponding Greek, as Ariston for Toby, Boethus for Ezra, Justus for Zadok, Philo for Jedidah, Theodorus for Nathaniel, and Zosimus for Ayim. It was somewhat rare for the same name to be used by both sexes. In biblical times this occurs with regard to the names Abigail, Abia, Athaliah, Shushan, Epher, Mesha, Nahash, Shelemith, Zibiah. In Talmudic times, with regard to Ibu, Yohanan, Nehori, Pasi, Shalom. The only later instances that may be cited are Jerahim, Mazalob, Nefhama, Menuha, Simha, Tamar, Bongodas, and Bian Li Viang. To wear a man's name seemed as objectionable as wearing men's clothes. It was already noticed in Talmudic times that the use of family names had died out. The name of Rabbi Meir was said to be derived from an experience at school which was regarded as being of good omen. It is recommended not to name a child after enemies of the Jews, like Sisera and Pharaoh, but to use the names of the patriarchs. Post-Talmudic period. As the Jews spread throughout the lands bordering the Mediterranean, they drew upon other languages for their personal names while still retaining biblical ones, and they were especially prone to adopt names ending in "l". These new names became exceptionally popular in Italy. To this source must be traced the new name Ushiel, composed on the same plan as the biblical ones ending in "l". The kings of the Chazars, so far as the names are known, wavered between pure biblical names, like Obadiah, and local names, like Bulan. The Karaites in the same neighborhood adopted Tartar names, one of them being known as Toktamish, but elsewhere Karaite names are mostly Arabic and Persian. The custom of calling one of the sons, generally the eldest, after the paternal grandfather, of which only 9 instances are known during the Talmudic period, became more popular, especially in European states. Maimonides' grandfather was Joseph ben Isaac ben Joseph ben Obadiah ben Solomon ben Obadiah, for instance, and certain families seem to have similarly confined themselves to a few chosen names. Thus, in the Kalonymous family there occurs Meshullam b. Moses b. Ithiel b. Moses b. Kalonymous b. Meshullam b. Kalonymous b. Moses b. Kalonymous b. Jekathiel b. Moses b. Meshullam b. Ithiel b. Meshullam, only 5 names among 14 persons throughout 3 centuries. As a consequence, certain names became characteristic of certain districts. Japheth and Caleb in Greece, and hence among the Karaites, Kalonymus in South Italy, Sheshay and Joab in Rome, Sinai and Pesa in Germany. Some of the older names were revived, Mir, for example, of which only 2 previous instances before had been known, the Tanna Mir and the Mir mentioned by Josephus. Samson was never used by Jews before the 11th century. Kinaim. The most striking tendency of the post-Talmudic period is the general choice of local names by the Jews for the civic relations. This led to the adoption of 2 names, one for civic purposes, known as the Kinwi, the other for use in the synagogue and in all Hebrew documents. The latter, the sacred name, was as far as possible associated with the former and was often a translation of a civic one, e.g., Asel for Diaphato, Manoah for Tranquillo, Ayim for Vita. At times the civic name was merely a contraction of the sacred one, e.g., Lesser for Eleazar, Sender for Alexander. In other cases, mere similarity in sound was sufficient to determine the sacred name, as Man for Menahem, Kalman for Kalonymus, and the like. Especially noteworthy was the use made of Jacob's blessing to transfer a personal name from the civic to the sacred sphere. Judah being compared to a lion's whelp in Jacob's blessing, Judah became Leo, or Lo, in lay relationship, and Ephraim became Fishlin. Later on, these name equations became so usual that they formed doublets, which were almost invariably found together, as Dov Bar Naphtali Hirsch, Solomon Zalman, Judah or Ariel Ob, Binyamin Wolf, and these again gave currency to similar correlative names, as Uri Phoebus. Titular abbreviations. It was during the Middle Ages that the somewhat curious custom arose of combining the abbreviation of a title with the initials of a name to form a single personal name. This almost invariably implies frequency of mention, and, therefore, celebrity. The best-known examples are those of Rashi and Rambam, who are hardly ever quoted in rabbinical texts except by these names, but there exists a large number of similar contractions. A somewhat similar use of a title is the combination with Messer, as in the Italian Messer Leon, while in Provence the honorary prefix is N for men, and Na for women, are combined with the name to form Engasek, Nabona, etc. Apart from these tendencies, the general trend of nomenclature among Jews in the Middle Ages was to adopt that of the countries in which they lived, the given names being often identical with those of the surrounding peoples, and other means of identification being derived mainly from localities or offices. Certain peculiarities of various countries may be taken separately. Mizrahim. Among the Mizrahim it was quite common to replace the Hebrew names with relevant Arabic ones, whenever they bore a religious note and were deemed sacred to both Jews and Muslims. So Abraham turned into Ibrahim, Aharon into Haran, David into Daud, Moshe into Musa, and Shlomo into Solomon and Salman. The indication of a family's elevated religious status, which also gained its members the reverence of the non-Jewish neighbors, was expressed in Arabic through the name. One has to note that such names were often given by the surrounding non-Jewish communities, who confused the appropriate religious terms of the halakha. An example of this is the name Nader, which is the Arabic translation of Nazir. The Hebrew root word Nazir means delineation or designation, and refers to the status of Nazirid in which a person makes a vow to isolate himself from certain matters, such as intoxicating beverages, and other material luxuries, as well as things that considered being tameh. Yet in the Arabic environment a family of Kohanim would often be described as such through the name Nazir or Nader. The obvious reason behind the wrong usage of the term Nazir in its attribution to Kohanim is the fact that the Mizrahi Kohanim had always strictly adhered to the relevant halachic clause, which entailed that they avoid coming into contact with corpses, lest they lose the status of purity, and which is similar to the rules that govern the status of Nazirites, as well as the perception amongst the surrounding Arab neighbors, especially the Coptic Christians, as being consecrated to the religious service of the Beit HaMikdash. Personal peculiarities also gave rise to a Jew's name in the Arab world, as Abiad referred to fair skin, a fair possessor of strength, health or well-being, Tawil to a tall person. It was also quite usual that Hebrew names were translated into their corresponding meaning in the Arabic language, such as Aiden into Latif, Al-Outfi Eleazar into Mansur, Gershom into Garib, Masliak into Maimon, Samia into Said, and Tovia into Hassan or Haslan. Common segments of Mizrahi society adopted local Arabic names, such as Abdullah, Abdallah, Abdo and Abudi, Farag, Masood, Murad, Nessim, Sabah, Sal, Salama, Salem and Salim, Zaki, because of the beautiful meanings, or the good fortune they seem to evoke. As had been the case within the Ashkenazi cultural environment, Mizrahim bore names that related to the trades and occupations, such as Al-Baz, Abatbul, Hayakan Karyut, Hakim, Naga, Sabah, Saban, Sanuit, Saruf or Asera, Shenihav, all referring to ivory and mean ivory craftsman, a trader. Yemenite Jewish names were often adopted by place names such as Zanani, Taizi, Harazi, and Amari. Other family names indicate pre-Islamic Jewish origins such as Kahalani and Koril. Additionally, some Yemenite Jewish was related to their occupations such as Tabib, Taviv and Qafih, being influenced by the surrounding Arab culture, which is prone to superstition. Mizrahim sought to avert the Ain Ha'ara and envy by never calling the dearest of the children by the real name. In their quest to protect a child, parents would even revert to such drastic measures as giving it a very unattractive nickname, such as Garbua, which has later become a family name. Contrary to Ashkenazim, the Mizrahim applied the rulings of Talmud Shabbat 134, which provides that a child be called after a living relative. This led to the creation of another Mizrahi particularity, where a child could be named Sarah bat Sarah or Abraham ben Abraham, which as per Ashkenazi customs, would only have been applied to a girl. Name-giving also served as a social welfare tool, whereby poor parents sought to secure the support of a benefactor for the child, by naming him after a wealthy relative or employer, who would show his acceptance to look after the welfare of the child by presenting it with a first set of clothing, and later on support him with marriage expenses and the like. The Mizrahim also reverted to this measure as a means to strengthening the family ties between a married woman and her blood relatives, whereby a newly born child would be named after the elder of the mother's family, or one of its notables, and thus retain his material benevolence, as well as underline the husband's expressed will to align himself to his spouse's family and gain the goodwill, or at least not to estrange his wife from her roots. A peculiarity of the Arabic onomatology is the kunya, the by-name given to a father after the birth of his son, by which he is named after the latter. It may be added here that Abu al-Walid is a kunya by name for Jonah. Abu also forms family names, as in the case of Abudram or Abu Ab. Here it has to be noted that the word Abu was sometimes used in the sense of owner, especially when it was followed by an object that was of importance to the manner in which the surrounding community perceived the person in question. The most prominent example for this is Abu Hasira, a descendant of a long line of Kabbalists and Pietists from Morocco, who whose real name Yaakov ben Masood has almost been forgotten, as he has become identified as Rabbi Abu Hasira since his pilgrimage from his homeland to Jerusalem, during which the boat he was on sank. Yet he was miraculously saved because he hung on to his straw mat, which had been his only possession. For this the Egyptian population venerated him from that day on as a holy man and miracle worker, whose life had been protected by the Lord through a frail mat. Akin to this is the use of the Arabic ibn, which is related to Hebraic ben, like in Benjamin or Benjamin, to form a family name amongst Mizrahim who lived in the eastern part of the Arab world. Among the best known of this formation are Ibn Aknan, Ibn Danan, Ibn Latif, Ibn Migaz, Ibn Verga. Those Jews who lived in the North Africa countries chose the use of the word O, sometimes spelled U, which created the names Al-Harana, Ohayon, Onin. The Arabic article al appears in quite a number of names, as in al-Arizi. Other names of interest, given by Steinschneider in a long list of 800 Arabic names in the Jewish Quarterly Review, are Goyat, Ibn Danan and Ibn al-Dayyal al-Haruni, Ibn Waqha, Ibn Zabra and Ibn Zimra, Haji Jafar. Morel is said to be derived from Samuel. Mulko means royal. Masad is equivalent to Barak. Makatul would be a proper origin for the family name. Makata, Nahara and Nahara refer to carpentry. Sassin is merely a transcript of Sassin. The proper names Said, Saad, and Sadin are equally popular among Jews and Arabs. Abbas corresponds to Judah, as Leo and the like in Europe. Very many Judeo-Arabic names are compounded of Abd, as Abdullah and Abd al-Walid. Al-Faraj occurs as the name of the translator at Djenti, and it is possibly the remote origin of the curious name of Admiral Farragut, whose grandfather came from Minorca. It is considered doubtful whether the name of the Imus is Hebrew in that form, or whether it should be pronounced as an Arabic word, Amhi. Surname. Jews have historically used Hebrew patronymic names. In the Jewish patronymic system, the first name is followed by either Ben-Abat, and then the father's name. Permanent family surnames exist today but only gained popularity amongst Sephardic Jews in Iberia and elsewhere as early as the 10th or 11th century, and did not spread widely to the Ashkenazic Jews of Germany or Eastern Europe until the late 18th and mid-19th century, when laws were passed mandating their adopt surnames. Thus, while many European and North American Jews now use European and German surnames for everyday life, the patronymic form is still used in Jewish religious and cultural life, and is common in Israel. It is used in synagogue and in documents in Jewish law such as the Ketubah. Many Sephardic Jews used the Arabic Ibn instead of Bat Ben when it was the norm. The Spanish family Ibn Ezra is one example. Many immigrants to modern Israel changed their names back to Hebrew names, to erase remnants of Galuti life still surviving in family names from other languages. This is especially common among Ashkenazic Jews, because most of the European names were taken later and some were imposed by the German and Austro-Hungarian empires. A popular form to create a new family name using Jewish patronymics, sometimes related to poetic Zionist themes, such as Ben-Ami or Ben-Artzi, and sometimes related to the Israeli landscape, such as Bailan. Others have created Hebrew names based on phonetic similarity with their original family name. Golda Meir became Golda Meir. Another famous person who used a false patronymic was the first Israeli Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, whose original family name was Grun but adopted the name Ben-Gurion, not Ben-Avidor. Change of name. change of name was not an unusual occurrence in biblical times, if one may judge by the instances occurring among the patriarchs, and it seems to have been not altogether unknown in later times. Thus, Moses Benveniste mentions a certain Obadiah who wandered from Germany to Turkey in 1654 and changed his name to Moses because the former name was unusual. Later in the Middle Ages, a person who was dangerously sick would change his name in the hope that the angel of death, who summons persons by name, would be baffled thereby. This custom, known as Meshanashem, is given in the Talmud and is mentioned by Judah Asid. One of the names thus adopted was the appropriate one of Ayim. In order to prevent any misunderstanding at the resurrection, the Kabbalists later recommended persons to learn a psalm, the first and last verses of which began and ended with the first and last letters of the names. Particular care is to be taken in the writing of names in legal documents, the slightest error in which invalidates them. Hence, there are quite a number of monographs on names, both personal and geographical. The first of which was that written by Simcha Cohen. The best known is that of Samuel ben Phoebus and Ephraim Zalman Margulies, entitled Ibgatan.